Hello and welcome to today's Q&A discussion. My name is Henrietta Brealey. I'm the Chief Executive of the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, and I'm joined by Mark Taylor, Regional Managing Partner at RSM. And we're just be catching up on all things topical at the moment, how it's feeling in the business community, particularly looking at Greater Birmingham, the future for the city and its key industries, and generally looking at what next for this fantastic local economy. So, Mark, I guess what are you seeing and hearing so far on the ground?
Really good to be with you this afternoon, Henrietta, and the chance to have the conversation. I think it's a really interesting time. As we sit here in the middle of June, and we start to contemplate, what's happening with office space. The implications of that for the city. I think over the last few months, I've been going into the office once or twice a week, and feeling the change in Birmingham as more and more people have started to go back into the city, but it still feels like it's some way off where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our sector in particular, we're a big occupier, the professional services sector occupier in the city, and what our people do, I think we'll have a big impact in terms of those numbers. We're an important part of that community. The bankers and lawyers and other cities that congregate in the sort of comorbid area. And we've got 250 people in Birmingham, so we're a reasonably sizable employer, and I think we are going to see some change. I think behaviours are going to change. I don't think anyone in our business is kind of thinking what's going forward is going to be exactly as it was in the past. Mm-hmm. On a given day, 250 people based in Birmingham, but probably occupancy of about half that. On any given day, a lot of our people will be out at clients, so probably 120-ish on an average day, although it would push up to more like 150 plus on peak days. And talking to our people now, there's definitely a preference in change in terms of what people want to do. We're seeing, we did a survey actually just a couple of weeks ago, and we asked people for their views, and the most frequently kind of chosen option was, I'd like to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. So kind of a 50-50 sort of model. It's not, that hides quite a lot of variance because quite different things that we do for clients. Our audit business, people are out with clients a lot of the time. So they would be typically, in the past, they wouldn't have been in the office for that amount of time anyway. They wouldn't have been in 2 or 3 days a week naturally. Other services are much more office based, but I think however it affects different service lines, I think we definitely see the average move, and probably go from an average of having 120 people in to maybe my best estimate at the moment is maybe that'll become 60 to 80 in the next year. Now we're all kind of speculating a little bit, aren't we? And people are prone to change their minds. And all those sort of factors. So we're all kind of looking ahead a little bit, and not knowing exactly what we're going to be dealing with and how the situation might evolve. But I think probably we anticipate quite a slow build up into the autumn. What we thought might happen on the 21st of June now, maybe that won't be the case. Maybe it'll push back up to a month. Then you're into summer holidays. So we see quite a quiet period in the next few months. Probably the numbers will start to creep up. I mean, right now, we've got only at the moment we're getting a small number of people going in each day, probably mm-hmm. 10 and 15, but that's generally for well-being reasons only. We're kind of encouraging people to stay away at the moment unless their home environment means, or their circumstances mean they can't work effectively unless they go to the office. But yeah, I think maybe into the autumn, into the winter, then maybe we'll get back at 60, 80. And if that's replicated across the sort of professional services community and everyone's looking at 50%-ish occupancy compared to what they had before, obviously that's a pretty profound impact, isn't it? In terms of number of people in the city, number of people to use services in the city, people to buy from lots of different businesses that rely on the office worker community. And I think that's a major feature, isn't it, for us, I think, as we contemplate the future of the city going forward.
Absolutely. I think it's a very different proposition, isn't it, with the lower number of daily commuters coming into the city. There's been some great stuff from Centre for Cities on tracking high streets recovery. And all the way through pandemic, major city centres have struggled much more than local centres because they rely so much more on the daily commuter. You know, the daily commuter coming in, grabbing their coffee on the way in, popping out for lunch, popping out for a drink after work, etc., popping into the shops. So until we start to see exactly what's going to happen with the future of city centre professional services in particular, returning to the office space, we don't know exactly for sure what that footfall in city centres is going to look like. And there's already a lot of work underway on, well, how do you change what city centres are for? Creating that sort of experiential economy, sort of bringing people in for activities that they can't get elsewhere, rather than just assuming that they'll be coming in as part of their commute. There's actually a lovely bit of research underway from Commonwealth at the moment on the future of business districts, which I think is just very interesting findings. But in terms of what you say about where you're seeing your journey towards hybrid working, I'm hearing that replicated across a lot of the professional services sector at the moment. Many sort of smaller creative sector employers even are already starting to look at how they can bring people back as quickly as possible, because they rely on sort of sparking ideas, those sort of serendipitations, that sort of energy that's needed. And of course, manufacturers, construction, they put people on site and working throughout. But among professional services, very much getting the feel that there are a few outliers. Goldman Sachs very publicly saying that it's their work and they'll expect people in 5 days a week, right the way through to the far end. I was speaking to a law firm the other day who are basically going to say, come in when you want. There's not going to be a set structure. It's going to be very much encouraging sort of as much home working as possible. But where we end up, I think will be interesting. So I know the experience from Australia and New Zealand was, and obviously they've had a very different pandemic to us, very, very different. But perhaps the expectation on, the volume of remote working versus in office working before people started returning to offices versus where it ended up, it's changed forever. There is still more flexible working than ever, but actually people ended up coming into the office perhaps a bit more than they expected once they sort of set back into those old habits. So yeah, there's still a lot up in the air of what exactly it's going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Henrietta, because I think, the benefits that we get from congregating as groups, working together as groups, and how humans have interacted in work for centuries, a lot of that still holds true, doesn't it? I mean, we're very conscious of, yes, we've got technology now which enables us to do things in a way, and we often reflect and think, well, if this had happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago, how different it would have been, because I suppose, our sector has pretty much fairly seamlessly been able to adapt, because we've got the technology, our clients are able to provide information to us in a digital form, and therefore for us to transition to that, to working how we've had to through the pandemic hasn't been that painful. But I think one thing we are hugely conscious of is that we have this conveyor-based system in accountancy, really, and the same goes for law, that you take on lots of school leavers and graduates each year to train with us, and that conveyor moves along, and people move along and progress their careers, and the people getting on that conveyor need to be getting the experiences of working with more senior people, and those experiences and skills being transferred. It's okay that you can sit and take your exams, and we've seen some fantastic exam results because people have clearly had plenty of time to study with not a lot else to do. But we're all very conscious that they've not had the experiences that they should have had, both in terms of transfer of information and skills, but also the social side of it. A lot of people come into this field of work because they want to be part of that. It's a social job. There's a lot of interaction with others, networking skills, business development skills, line management skills. There is a recognition that our junior people are not developing the skills that they're going to need in more senior roles this way. And so that, I think, maybe plays a bit to what you just said at the end of that, of what you just said a moment ago, Henrietta, in terms of the Australian and New Zealand experience, that maybe there'll be a pull that would pull people back because the need for that interaction is clear. But for us, I think it'll be getting balanced, because you need both sides of the equation. you need the junior people to go in to learn those skills, but of course you need the more experienced, typically older generations to go in as well, to be there to pass that information on, because I think we'd all accept that, you know, Teams or Zoom, it's goes so far, but you can't go, you know, you lose a lot.
Yeah, so much of what I've learned in my career, you know, you just pick up from sitting next to someone, hearing how they are on the phone, you know, seeing how they interact with other people around the office, asking those quick questions. Literally, when you've got to pick up the phone and call them or send them an email, feels a lot more invasive than if you just sat next to them and go, oh, how'd you do that? Or, you know, what made you approach that way? And yeah, it's really interesting. You know, you mentioned the way your sector's been able to innovate and adapt. You know, we've just gone through our second remote audit of the COVID era, and who'd have thought you could do audits remotely? You know, if you'd said that a couple of years ago, it would have been no chance. But yeah, the sector's been able to adapt incredibly well.
Yeah, it's definitely you know, definitely a mindset shift there, and we're seeing different different clients saying different things to us. You know, from, if you take audit, you know, some clients that are very keen that an audit goes back to being what it was before. Others who prefer us to adopt a far more remote model now. But of course, there is, you know, and as you say, you know, go back a couple of years, a client asking you to do a remote audit would have been viewed fairly suspiciously, because you think, what are they up to? And I think we have to, as you know, as our professional skepticism means we have to retain some of that. So any client who doesn't want to see us for, you know, at all, I think we'd have to view with some level of skepticism. But yeah, it definitely, that working model has shifted, and the amount of on-site work that we do, you know, it's been, you know, as anyone who's experienced an audit knows, it's been a team sitting together, working on a site, working on a client site, has been the typical model, and that'll still happen, but it won't be quite the same in future.
Obviously, it's that learning, isn't it? Like you say, the balance of picking the stuff that's worked really well and has actually made everything more efficient and effective, and then bringing back some of the things that we miss, you know, like the team and culture development. We've had quite a few starters during lockdown whose colleagues, you know, the first time they see them, the first thing they always say is, oh, I had no idea you were so tall, or something like that. Because the way you interact and build relationships with people, you know, it has to be planned if you're remote, because you're not going to be sort of, you know, bumping into someone from a totally different team that you never work with. You know, you've got to plan in those team building exercises and activities, which we've been doing over the last couple of months. But it's still, you know, some of those serendipitous conversations, it's really hard to replicate over a digital environment.
Definitely, I think, yeah, that kind of water cooler stuff that you know, because we talk about well, we could bring this team in on this day and bring this team on this day, but then you lose a lot of the value that we generate is through the interactions between the teams, and identifying, you know, problems or identifying opportunities to help clients comes from those interactions. So if we lose that, then that'll be to the detriment of the business in the medium and long term. So yeah, lots of challenges, Henrietta, I think. And as I say, you know, we're no one's completely clear how it's all going to play out, but we're in for an interesting few years, I think. You know, office space obviously is a very topical conversation as well. You know, and that's evaluating exactly how much we need in different locations. I mean, nationwide, we've got about 35 locations, and I think as a whole, you know, we don't think necessarily that number will necessarily come down significantly. There might be one or two locations that we decide, you know, no longer viable, but it on the whole, I think we'll still have a similar footprint, but each location might be smaller. Mm-hmm. Floor plates will be smaller because of those occupancy changes. And yeah, certainly we're looking at different types of furniture as well, more collaborative furniture, so that teams can work together in different ways. And so the nature of the office and what it's there for and how people interact when they're there, I think, you know, we're quite well known as an industry as being, you know, rows and rows of desks. That those days, I think, are probably shifting and changing, and we won't go back there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the type of work that you need to do sort of sat in your own little bubble in a desk, you know, reports, emails, all of those sorts of things can be just as well done from home. Like you say, it's that team collaboration piece, that bit of bringing people together, that I'm hearing from quite a few different folks, that they're sort of rethinking the physical environment as much as the management and team environment, to reflect that sort of growing need, which I think is exciting in a way. You know, change is always quite exciting. and there'll be a lot of developments to come. Obviously what it means for city centres and sort of large office-based developments, etc. I think that is a question of whether our city centres start looking different in the future. And whether, like I say, you do get more of that sort of experiential activity, more housing and residential alongside office space. But is that something that you've been thinking about or talking to clients and networks about, Mark?
Yeah, I think so, Henrietta, because the retail presence in the city centre, of course, has been shifting anyway, hasn't it, with the move to online. And you walk down New Street now, and it's not, it doesn't look how we'd want it to, does it? In terms of the occupancy level, there are a number of units which are not, particularly as you get to the Victoria Square end, which are not occupied. And you think, wow, in a city, in a prime retail, fairly prime retail location, even there you can't get full occupancy, which says a lot, doesn't it? I think, and so is that ever coming back? All these factors that are at play now, and especially with the declining footfall potentially of the office worker, just seems to push that whole issue. It makes it even more stark, doesn't it? And as you say, probably a lot of those units have got to be repurposed potentially, because they're simply not going to be perhaps viable from a retail perspective, which I think on one level is unfortunate, but we've got to seize the opportunity, haven't we, and find all the uses.
Yeah, and on the flip side, I have been hearing from business improvement districts and, say Touchwood and Solihull, that actually, outside of Birmingham City Centre, there has been a number of new units taken by independent businesses. It tends to be smaller units as well, which I think is part of the issue town centres have, is lots of very big units, very expensive units. Whereas actually what seems to be coming through at the moment is lots of smaller independent businesses that's offering really interesting propositions to consumers and really sort of engaging on a human level with very local areas and local clients, which was a real positive, I have to say. I've heard from a few different folks the number, not huge volumes, but more than expected opening over the past few months, or taking out space. But it is just that sort of shift away from the days of the department store. We've all seen what's been happening there over the past year. It is a real challenge for landlords who have those huge spaces, of how you change them, how you change the use. I think it's going to be an interesting time for sure.
Yes, and maybe there is that, that is another feature, that perhaps the move to suburban locations, the retail environment there perhaps will benefit. Naturally, I suppose a lot of people who perhaps would be in Birmingham city centre will come from places like Solihull on a daily basis, and if more people are around in Solihull centre, then perhaps there is a benefit to that location and others that are around the perimeter of the main city.
Yeah, it's all those shifting tides, isn't it? But one thing I find really interesting about this time is everyone is figuring it out as we go along. No one's been through this before. Everyone's watching other businesses in their network and going, how are you doing this? How are you responding to this? And I have to say, it's one of the things I love about doing what I do, is we get to bring people together to just have those conversations. I've always used the example of, I spoke to someone once about why they joined the chamber, and they said they were looking for people to ride the wave with, or struggling with RSWs there, ride the wave with. And it is that sense of, bringing people together, sharing that learning, sharing the experiences, and going, hey, we're all doing this together. Yeah,
absolutely. And I suppose the other thing I was going to touch on, Henrietta, is that what's the general vibe you feeling from the community around the clean air zone now? Because obviously that's another feature, isn't it, in terms of people getting back to the city?
Yeah, it's one where we're waiting to see the impact, to be honest. It's live, the clean air zone is live. Payments will, at the time of recording, have not started being taken yet, but will do very shortly. And it's one where I think everyone is on board with the idea of we need to do something to improve air quality. Some of the numbers about the excess death rates associated with poor air quality in the city, and just the reality that we're in a climate emergency. We've done a huge amount of engagement with businesses over the last couple of years. I think we've had about 500 delegates through the door at various different engagement events, round tables. The question is obviously then, well, what impact does that have right now? So we're really focused on raising awareness of the support packages. So you may not be aware, but anyone who works in the clean air zone but has a non-compliant vehicle, they can get an exemption for I think it's a year for those who earn under £30,000 a year.
Right.
There's an application form online. Same with businesses in the clean air zone. They can get a couple of licenses, exemptions for a couple of commercial fleet vehicles, and there's a few funds available as well to try and ease some of that impact. But change comes with disruption. It always does, and we've got to keep that eye out and make sure if it is impacting footfall in any way, steps taken to address it. But the hope is, particularly with where we are based at top end of Broad Street, you can see the tram and the development that's coming up there apace. The stops are now in, and the investment that's gone into the tram, and also some more to do in places, but some of the really good stuff around expanding sort of bus routes, and we do have a good intra-city rail links as well. Just making sure it's all joined up and meets the need of the economy, particularly the nighttime economy, and businesses that are impacted are being heard. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, because like I say again, it's one where the reasoning behind it completely sound, but obviously this is a strange time for everyone, so it's just waiting to see if it is starting to impact businesses, picking it up, escalating it, and getting them the support they need.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. In terms of the motivation, the health motivation and the climate motivation, I think is extremely sound, isn't it? And hopefully we can ease the transition and embrace the benefits of having done that.
And what's your sense as a city centre employer? Is it something that your employees have fed back on? Is it something where it's been raised, or is it not so much on people's minds as they're not really in the office?
I think definitely a bit of the latter at the moment. The conversations had started when it was previously going to be implemented a year ago. I think actually for us, the people who do commute in from a distance, a lot of them do take trains. So actually there aren't that many drivers on a given day, and the proportion of them that will be impacted by hit the trigger for the daily charge would be relatively small, because we've got a collection of people who actually live, younger people typically, who tend to live within commuting distance on foot or fairly close into the city centre, who would take public transport, maybe a bus into the city centre, and a number of people go on trains. So the impact for us, I think, is relatively small, Henrietta, of that change. But yes, it's a little bit down the agenda at the moment because so few people are travelling. Yeah, I think it'll be when people start to come back in and realise that it's in place. That's where keeping that communication going is going to be really important. And of course, we've got another major event starting with C coming up next year, Commonwealth Games. Again, as a city centre employer, is there something you're excited about? Is there something that you're looking to make your team part of? Definitely. I think, again, probably has lost a little bit of focus as we've been looking at other things over recent times, but I think we'll see a considerable ramp up in interest as we get back to more of normality in the coming months. I think it's a hugely beneficial thing for the city. We've got to seize the opportunity. I actually lived in Manchester when the Commonwealth Games came to the city and saw the benefits that brought. I probably regret slightly not having embraced it as much as I should. I didn't attend any events in Manchester. I firmly intend to attend as much as I can next summer. And I think it's business community as a whole needs to engage with it, and it hopefully can be a real lift for us as we hopefully by that time reach quite a different phase in terms of how things feel.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so exciting. And as a cheeky plug and a bit of an update, applications for volunteering now live. The ballot for tickets will be going out over the summer. So definitely one to keep an eye out on. I know I'm going to be, submitting as many requests for tickets as I'm possibly allowed, because I just think it's so exciting. It's that once in a generation opportunity for the city, isn't it? And particularly the year that retail and hospitality have had. If we get this right, if we do, I talk to Glasgow Chamber quite a lot as another UK city that's hosted Commonwealth Games, and they were 2014, and they said the big thing for them was how much it captured the city centre. They had all sorts of arts and cultural performances going on, as well as the sporting activity going on at the events. And I know there's some really exciting plans for Birmingham 2022 as well, but that capturing the city centre, sort of driving up the footfall, getting a really sort of festival celebratory vibe for the city. You know, it just couldn't come at a more essential time for that retail accommodation hospitality sector last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll keep our fingers crossed for the weather.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's always the risk with the British summer, isn't it?
It is. But yeah, something akin to what we've had in the last couple of weeks wouldn't be too bad, would it?
Definitely. Brilliant. Right, well, thank you so much for joining me, Mark. I mean, do you have any sort of final comments, final reflections, any thoughts on where we are and where we're going?
No, I think that's been, it's been really good to get your views and your feedback, Henrietta, from the communication channels that you have on what people are saying about some of these challenges. I think it's as it always seems to be, really we're at a really interesting point, aren't we, right now? I think, and hopefully an inflection where we see a lot more positivity in the coming months, I hope. And yeah, it's been really good this afternoon to have that conversation and get your input. So thanks for taking the time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining me. And on that positivity, we're definitely seeing and hearing it. There is a lot of real energy out there, real enthusiasm, lots of reports from lots of different industries that they are incredibly busy at the moment, which is always a good sign. And as a cheeky plug, we've just finished surveying for our quarterly business report survey for Q2, which will be launching later in June, and the recording of that event will be available after as well for those watching this online at a later date. And it's a really great barometer of business sentiment in the city region. And as an early heads up, it's looking pretty positive. Overall, there's some really good trends starting to come through. Fantastic.
That's really good to hear.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, thank you again, Mark. And yeah, look forward to seeing you on a future Q&A and hopefully in person in the not too distant future.
And likewise, Henrietta, thank you very much, and have a great weekend.